All right, so in this particular discussion, I'll look at the endocrine system. So because of the time, I'll just look at the first component of it, mainly focusing on the first two glands of vital importance to the endocrine system, namely the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, or what is commonly referred to as the master gland. First things first, endocrine system is a system of glands. Now we have two forms of glands in the human body. We have glands that have ducts. We call those as exocrine glands. They form the exocrine system. For example, salivary gland, gastric glands, so on and so forth. Then ductless glands are endocrine glands. This discussion or preamble was hinted on the time we're discussing epithelial tissue. We see that the origin of both endocrine and exocrine glands is the same. They both originate from the ectoderm. The major difference is that the endocrine glands lose connection with the ectoderm, whereas the exocrine glands have a physical connection with the ectoderm by way of a duct. Now, because endocrine glands lose connection, you find that these glands go deeper into tissues and organs or glands of the human body. Now, since they don't have ducts, how do they make sure that the products that they are producing reach the intended target? Since they don't have a duct to channel that product. That's when the circulatory system comes into play. Therefore, there is an important interplay between the endocrine system and the circulatory system. You can simply put it to say the circulatory system acts as the ducts of the endocrine system, because blood vessels, arteries, veins, venues, capillaries are found nearly in all body organs and tissues. And therefore, hormones can reach those tissues by being transported in blood by the vessels. Okay. Now, here we have a summary of the endocrine system represented by the diagram. So from head to toe, or cephalic to caudal, inside the brain there, we have the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus, meaning inferior to the thalamus. We also have what we call the epithalamus. We also have what we call the subthalamus. So that part you're seeing there is the thalamus. That is the thalamus. Then inferior to it, this part here is the hypothalamus. Then further inferior to the hypothalamus, we have the pituitary gland, or what you can say the hypophysis. This is the hypophysis, the pituitary gland. Okay. Okay, so those are the two glands I'm going to look at in this discussion, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. They are both parts of the nervous system. They are part of the brain, okay, or extensions of the brain itself. In addition to that, we have several other endocrine glands. For example, in the cervical region, on the neck region, we have thyroid gland. Somewhere in the thoracic region, we have the thymus gland. This is an adult, so that's why it's appearing yellowish here. The thymus gland keeps on reducing in size as we advance in age. Like you and I, mostly it will be fat. But in young persons, it will be a functional gland. And this gland is essential in maturation of T lymphocytes. The heart, to some extent, also produces some form of hormone, okay, arterial nitric factor, which acts on the kidneys, but that is not considered fully as part of the endocrine system. Then we have the pancreas, of course. That is also an endocrine gland. Remember, the pancreas is both exocrine and endocrine. When we're talking about endocrine, we're looking at the islets of Langerhans. When we're talking about the exocrine pancreas, we are looking about production of pancreatic juice. Excuse me, I'm choking. Just some dust. Okay, then in addition to that, on each kidney, that is a right kidney, this is a left kidney. The right kidney, of course, is inferiorly located because of the liver there. So it's quite on the lower side than the left one, as you can see. Now, on top of each kidney, I don't know if you can see, there's a yellowish organ there, yellowish brown. Those are called adrenal glands, or you can call them the suprarenal glands. So all these are also endocrine glands. In addition to that, because of the differences in gender or sex, when it comes to males, we have the male gonads, which we call testes. So the testes are also endocrine glands because they produce hormones, testosterone. Females' ovaries are the female gonads. They also produce hormones, estrogen and progesterone. So these are the male gonads, the testes, female gonads, the ovaries. So in summary, those are the endocrine glands that we have. Now let's look at the two glands that we are going to discuss on today. So we'll start with the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus, like I was saying, it means the under chamber. It forms the inferolateral walls of the third ventricle. When we discuss the brain, we'll look at ventricles. So the brain has 4 ventricles, 2 lateral ventricles, a third ventricle, and a 4th ventricle. Okay. 4th one is here. 3rd, sorry. 4th is here. That is the, sorry. 1st and 2nd, they are lateral ventricles. So they face one another, okay? 1st and 2nd. So it's very difficult to know whether it is the left or the right that is number 1 or number 2. So we just call them as lateral ventricle. And then this is a 3rd ventricle. This is the 3rd ventricle communicating with the lateral ventricles there by a foramen of Monroe. Then 3rd ventricle is now communicating with the 4th ventricle via the aqueduct of Sylvius. This is aqueduct of Sylvius, this tunnel here. So that is the 4th ventricle. Then this is a central canal of the spinal cord in which cerebrospinal fluid flows. So the ventricles simply act as sites for synthesis and the flow of cerebrospinal fluid. So this is the thalamus, this part here, thalamus. Then inferior to the thalamus is the hypothalamus. That is the hypothalamus there. Then this is a pituitary gland. That is the optic chiasma. Remember, the optic nerve coming from the right and the left eye cross each other to form this chiasm. Okay. Then there's a swelling here known as the mammillary body. This swelling there is mammillary body. So simply the hypothalamus lies between the optic chiasma and the mammillary body. Mammillary like breast. Okay, there's an extension there that is not shown clearly here. That is the hypothalamus. This is a pituitary gland. So we'll focus on the hypothalamus for now. Okay, now when it comes to brain and its parts, so its parts are very difficult to distinguish from one another because there is no clear-cut demarcation Okay, so that is quite a bit difficult to isolate parts of the brain. Okay, and where the boundary is. So you find that there is a lot of overlapping of structures within the central nervous system, specifically the brain itself. So here it's actually the yellow and blue. So this is the hypothalamus. This is the pituitary gland. Okay, that is a pituitary gland there. So our focus will be here now. What is happening in this, important structure? So number one is that the hypothalamus contains dozens of gray matter. Now, remember, gray matter is nothing but a collection of cell bodies of neurons. Neurons, these are excitable cells. So within the hypothalamus, there are tens of cell bodies, thousands of cell bodies. Now, a collection of cell bodies forms what we call a nuclei. Okay, on the surface of the brain, that is called gray matter here. Cell bodies found on this surface, we call it gray matter. Now, what about cell bodies that are found deeper within the brain or located closer to the base of the brain? We call them as nuclei, because you don't find them having a huge extension like that. You just find them in isolation. So that's why the name changes from gray matter to nuclei, or nucleus for single. Now, each nucleus within the hypothalamus has a specific function that it performs. Okay, so there's a nucleus that is responsible, for example, for controlling temperature, thermoregulation nuclei. There's a nucleus that is responsible for control of hunger and feeling of fullness, or satiety, if you like. So that feeling to say, I don't have to continue eating, all that information is coming from the hypothalamus. Or the feeling of hunger is being commanded by the hypothalamus. So you find that damage to certain areas of the hypothalamus, either by disease, drugs, trauma, or otherwise, depending on the type of nuclei that are damaged, you will see various manifestations in this patient. If, for example, there is damage to the thermoregulation nuclei, meaning this person will be unable to maintain a normal core body temperature. Either they will have high temperature or they are going to have low temperature, because cells that are responsible to detect and control high or low temperature have been damaged in that sense. Okay, so that's how vital the hypothalamus is. In addition to that, the hypothalamus is now acting as a point of connection between the nervous system, which is now nerve cells, neurons, and the endocrine system. Endocrine system is hormones. Nervous system is nerve cells. Now, these two systems both work together to maintain homeostasis. Now, where do they interact with each other? So the hypothalamus is an important point of connection between the nervous system and the endocrine system. The major difference is this: apart from one controlling homeostasis by way of producing hormones, and the other controlling homeostasis by producing action potentials. Another difference is that when the nervous system is adjusting the body so that homeostasis is maintained, the nervous system acts quickly, and then that effect also quickly expires. For example, if you touch on something that is hot, you have to withdraw that hand from that source of injury. After that, that reaction of the body disappears. But the endocrine system responds slowly, and the effect is sustained over a longer period of time. For example, growth of the body. When we were younger, 10 years, 15 years, even the body was small. But there's constant production of growth hormone, very minute amounts of it, just mils. But we find that growth is sustained over a longer period of time. You continue growing. So the endocrine system is slow in acting, but sustained in terms of effect. And the opposite is true for the nervous system. Fast and also expires rapidly. What are the major functions of the endocrine system? So number one is major functions of the hypothalamus is to control autonomic nervous system. Remember, autonomic nervous system, we're looking at the subconscious level of function. So we're looking at the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. We have no control over that. Okay, you don't decide to feel fear. It's an automatic reaction to something that is threatening to you. Control of emotional response, so that the response is appropriate to the stimuli, or that the hypothalamus is involved in such emotional response. Equally, if there are damages to certain areas of the hypothalamus, emotional response may be affected. So you see agitation, you see depression and other manifestations. Regulation of body temperature, this one I explained, then hunger and thirsty. So we have nuclei or groups of cell bodies in the hypothalamus that control hunger and satisfaction in terms of intake of nutrients. Then control of motivational behavior. Okay, what are some of the activities that this individual is inclined to? So when it comes to behavior, the hypothalamus is involved. There's another part of the brain known as the limbic system. Okay, so together with the hypothalamus, emotion and motivations are regulated. Then sleep and wake cycle in coordination with the pineal gland, which is also part of the nervous system, of the endocrine system. The hypothalamus is also involved in controlling how much we sleep and when we sleep and when we are awake. So during the day, body is active. At night, body function reduces so that we can rest. Then control of endocrine system. So most of the hormones produced by the hypothalamus are actually called factors because their action is local. It's just nearby in the pituitary gland. So we call them as factors. So they stimulate or inhibit production of another hormone by the pituitary gland. So that's why we call them as factors. Then in addition to that, it is part of formation of memory. So stimuli, events, and other experiences that human beings face, there is a connection between the hippocampus, the Papez circuit. I will discuss that more in the nervous system. Papez circuit is very essential for memory. It's a connection of various parts of the brain in which information passes through. And then that way information is stored as learned memory. And we always recall or use that information. For example, if you use a laser blade and then you cut yourself, that information is stored to say next time such an event can occur. So therefore, your handling of such an instrument will be regulated because of past experience. Now, various parts of the hypothalamus have been associated with certain specific functions. Okay, so I won't waste so much time on that. What I want you to focus on are these functions, but in your own free time, you can look at these. Mainly will not ask about them, but for example, the anterior hypothalamus, posterior hypothalamus, which areas or which functions are associated with it. For example, anterior hypothalamus here is associated with parasympathetic, posterior associated with sympathetic, so on and so forth. Okay, so these are the factors or rather hormones produced by the hypothalamus. So number one is the thyrotropin releasing hormone. So this releasing hormone or factor will go to the hypothalamus, okay, and now stimulate the hypothalamus to produce thyroxine stimulating hormone, which will go and stimulate the thyroid gland. So you find that the hypothalamus has no direct effect on the end organ. They are always acting with the pituitary gland, the master gland. So all these gonadotropin releasing hormone, again, goes to the pituitary gland. This will eventually stimulate the pituitary gland to produce follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Somatostatin, this is growth hormone inhibiting hormone. So this goes to the pituitary gland and inhibits production of growth hormone. Okay, so that is somatostatin. A similar substance is produced by the pancreas. So the pancreas also produces somatostatin. It's not only the hypothalamus. Then growth hormone releasing hormone is being produced by the hypothalamus to go and stimulate the pituitary gland to release growth hormone. Now, growth hormone affects nearly all tissues and cells in the human body. It does not spare any, because all those organs or tissues in the body need to grow. And therefore, receptors for growth hormone are found on all body tissues, to be specific. So you see, this hormone, somatostatin, and growth hormone releasing hormone are acting in opposition. This inhibits the pituitary gland to produce growth hormone, whereas this one is stimulating the pituitary gland to produce growth hormone. Then we have corticotropin releasing hormone. Corticotropin releasing hormone or factor stimulates the pituitary gland to produce corticotropic hormone. This hormone goes directly to the adrenal gland. That is from the pituitary gland when it is stimulated by this one. So corticotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus goes to the pituitary gland to cause secretion of corticotropin hormone, which stimulates the adrenal gland to produce various hormones of the cortex. For example, aldosterone, cortisol, and androgens. Androgens there are useful to distinguish between a male and female baby as they are growing. Remember, it's only at puberty when the gonads begin to produce hormones that will now bring about secondary sexual features in males and female subjects. Then lastly, we have dopamine and prolactin releasing hormones. So all these are being produced by the hypothalamus. Dopamine is an inhibitory hormone that is produced and is used in the brain to control and regulate discharge of impulses by neurons in various pathways. So dopamine is an essential neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. At the same time, dopamine is a feel-good hormone. So when dopamine is released, there is a euphoric state that the body feels. So for example, you're watching a movie, you're out on a date, and you're excited about it, dopamine is being produced, and that's why there's a feeling of excitement and joy. So that's why it's called a feel-good hormone. Very essential and also implicated in mental health issues. So individuals who have reduction in dopamine production usually tend to have disturbed or distorted behavior that may lead to mental disorder. So that's all about the hypothalamus. It is a major link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Where is it located? It's in the brain, between the optic chiasma and the mammillary body. Optic chiasma, mammillary body. This structure here, that is the hypothalamus. What is found there? We find collections of cell bodies. which we call nuclei. Now, each nuclei has a certain type of function it performs. So there will be a nuclei that will be responsible for thermoregulation, a nuclei that will be responsible for emotional response, nuclei that will be responsible for memory, and so on and so forth. Then what I was trying to establish on top of that is that the hypothalamus will produce releasing factors, which we can also call hormones, that stimulate the pituitary gland to produce hormones now. Okay. So that's why there's always a struggle whether these products from the hypothalamus should be called hormones or simply factors. Nevertheless, all of them go and stimulate or inhibit production of a hormone in the pituitary gland. That being said, let's look at the pituitary gland and then we'll conclude from there. So pituitary gland, otherwise known as master gland or the hypophysis cerebri. So hypothalamus, inferior to the hypothalamus is the hypophysis. So I'll be using these words interchangeably. This is the hypophysis cerebri, which you can also call the pituitary gland or simply the master gland. It's quite a small gland. If you look at it, just about 1 centimeter in diameter and weighs about 0.5 grams, not even a 1 gram. It's quite a small organ. Now, this organ is called master gland for a reason, because of what type of hormones it's going to produce and their effect in the body. So we can simply say control of the endocrine system is between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Now, why is the pituitary gland called master gland? Because what is coming out of these are hormones, not factors. And by nature or by definition, a hormone is a chemical that is produced by a gland and then exerts its effect in a distant organ. So you see that substances that are going to be produced here, their action is needed elsewhere and very far away in the human body. So that's why I'll call it the master gland of the endocrine system. It has several other names. Okay. Now, there's an area within the brain where the pituitary gland is contained or housed. So that area is surrounded by bones for protection. So that area is called the sella tussica, or we can also call it the pituitary fossa or hypophyseal fossa. So this is a bone. This is a sphenoid bone found in the roof of our nose. That is a sphenoid bone, and that's a sphenoid sinus. Now, the sphenoid bone has a small depression here in which the pituitary gland is found. So we call this as the sella tussica or pituitary fossa. It is very visible even on X-ray. So if you take a lateral view X-ray of the skull, it will be very visible there. Of course, you will not see the pituitary gland because X-rays cannot pick up soft organs. So that is a space here. That is a sella tussica or hypophyseal fossa. Okay. So you can see that this gland is well protected by bone. So it is still part of the brain. Then it will now secrete its hormones, which will work in organs that are distant, far away from the brain. Okay, now let's look at divisions of the pituitary gland. Remember, the hypothalamus, we're just dividing it into anterior and posterior. Now, we look at the pituitary gland. So pituitary gland has two parts. It has an anterior part as well and a posterior part, just like the hypothalamus. But in addition to that, the pituitary gland has subdivisions. So the anterior pituitary gland is further subdivided into 3 parts. Equally, the posterior pituitary gland is subdivided into 3 parts. So let's begin with the anterior pituitary gland. So in terms of origin, the anterior and posterior pituitary gland originate from two different structures. The anterior pituitary gland originates from the mouth. Okay. Originates from the mouth. It is still ectoderm, yes, but the origin is from the mouth. Then the posterior pituitary gland originates from the nervous tissue or the brain itself. So that part of the mouth, we call it the Rathke's pouch. Rathke's pouch. I think I have that name somewhere. Let me look it now. Where is it now? Okay. I think I will find it as we go on. Rathke's pouch is spelled as Rathke. That is Rathke's pouch. Anyway, that is where the anterior pituitary glands comes from, or you can simply say the primordial mouth. When the human being is developing, the part that will become a mouth is where the gland comes from, the anterior pituitary gland, this one here. So in terms of histological image, when you're looking at the pituitary gland under a microscope, you will see that it looks like two parts that are totally different from one another. The anterior one will look like a gland. It is a glandular tissue. Remember, we talked about glandular epithelium. If you check those, discussions we had, glandular epithelium. So that is how the anterior pituitary gland appears. Then the posterior pituitary gland appears like nervous tissue. We also discussed nerve tissue under tissues. So you can also revise that discussion. So the anterior one is here, which is glandular in nature because origin is the mouth. Then the posterior one is nervous tissue in appearance because the origin is brain. Then the part in between now, between the anterior and the posterior, is what we call the intermediate lobe, separating anterior from posterior. This one here. So the remainder of the Rathke's pouch will be found in the intermediate lobe as cysts. You can see those, circular structures. Those are remnants of the Rathke's pouch from which the anterior pituitary gland originates from. So they go there and create a boundary between the anterior and the posterior pituitary gland. So this part is non-function, the intermediate lobe, but these two are function. So let's look at the divisions of the anterior pituitary gland. So anterior pituitary gland is divided into the following. So anterior pituitary gland can also be called adenohypophysis. Adeno means gland. Hypophysis is pituitary gland anyway. So adenohypophysis is the anterior pituitary gland with three divisions. Number one is the anterior lobe, which we can call the pars anterior or pars distalis or pars glandularis, whichever you decide to pick here, is the largest part of the anterior pituitary gland as shown here. Okay, let me use a pointer. So that is the whole lot here, this whole thing is the anterior pituitary gland or the adenohypophysis. Now it is further divided into pars distalis. So the large part of it, the majority of the anterior pituitary gland is the pars distalis, this whole part here. Then the next part is the pars intermedia, this one here, which separates the posterior from the anterior. Then the third part is the pars tubularis, that is the pars tubularis. So pars tubularis, pars intermedia, and pars distalis. Now, we know that the anterior pituitary gland produces a lot of hormones, meaning most of those hormones will be produced by the pars distalis. So this is the most important part of the anterior pituitary gland. This one here, the pars distalis, of course. So infundibulum is part of the posterior pituitary gland, this one here, or the stalk, if you like, which is a physical connection of the whole pituitary gland to the brain. Let me take it back a bit. Yeah, this one. That is a stalk or the infundibulum. Majority of it is nerves, axons, sorry. Those are axons extending from the hypothalamus into the posterior pituitary gland. There. So that is a stalk. And only a small part of it is granular. We call it the pars tubularis. Okay. So that is a functional part of the anterior pituitary gland, the pars distalis. Let's look at the posterior pituitary gland and its subdivision. So posterior pituitary gland is also known as a neurohypophysis. Remember, I was saying its origin is from the nerve tissue. That's why the name is neuro. The anterior one, the origin is mouth. That's why it's named adeno. Adeno means gland. Glandular epithelium, by the way. So that is a neurohypophysis. How many parts does it? It also has 3 parts. It has the posterior lobe, or what we can call the pars posterior or pars nervosa. So this is pars nervosa. The large part of the posterior pituitary gland is pars nervosa. The large part of the anterior pituitary gland is pars distalis. Okay. In addition to that, the neurohypophysis has infundibular or infundibular stalk, which is here, and the infundibular eminence. So this is the infundibular stem or stalk and the infundibular eminence there, more like a projection. This dilated area is the eminence. Now, majority of the function of the posterior pituitary gland is with the pars nervosa here. So that is a pars nervosa. Okay. That being said, let's look at now what type of products or chemicals are being produced by these 2 glands, the pars tubularis and the pars nervosa. Okay, so we'll start with the anterior one. Okay, maybe before I go to that, let's look at communication between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Remember, hypothalamus is this part here. Then this is a whole pituitary gland having anterior and posterior and anterior. Anterior, posterior. Anterior, posterior. This side, this is anterior, that is posterior. So, again, this is anterior pituitary gland. Majority of it is pars nervosa. That part in between pars tubularis, sorry. Pars distalis. Pars distalis, pars intermedia, pars nervosa. Then that is pars tubularis. Then this is the infundibular stalk. That is the infundibular eminence. Okay. Now, there are 2 types of communication between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So we'll start with how does the hypothalamus communicate with the anterior pituitary gland? So that communication is named as the hypothalamic hypophysio-portal system. Hypothalamic meaning hypothalamus, hypophysio meaning hypophysis, which is the pituitary gland. Portal system. Now, a portal system is a system of blood vessels. We discussed this under circulatory system, where we said there are only 2, so far, there are 2 non-portal systems. There's a hepatic portal system and hypothalamic hypophysio-portal system. So we must take note of that. Such questions may come somewhere. So, now, what is a portal system? A portal system is 2 capillary networks. A capillary network up there in the hypothalamus and a capillary network down below in the pituitary, in the anterior pituitary gland, connected by blood vessels, to be specific, veins. Arteries, sorry, artery. Now, what happens here is, under normal circumstance, when blood leaves, blood is leaves the heart and then is channeled to body parts by arteries. Okay. Then it reaches capillaries. Then after capillaries, just a minute. Oh, sorry for that. So I was trying to explain the portal system. So this is capillary. We're saying when the blood leaves the heart, blood is taken to body parts by arteries. Now it will reach capillaries in tissues. Then from there, gases and nutrients will diffuse into the tissues. Then blood is now collected from that capillary by veins and then transported back to the heart by veins. Now in a portal system, we are going to have veins here, but the connection, instead of going veins all the way back to the heart, those veins will run into another network of capillaries. So that forms a portal system. So you have capillary, vein, then back to capillary. So that looks like a distortion of the normal order, because after a capillary, there should be vein, then followed by veins, then blood back to the heart. But in a portal system, there will be capillary, vein, and then back to another capillary, like that. So this is what we call the hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system. So capillaries in the hypothalamus are useful there because the hypothalamus will produce those releasing factors. Those releasing factors will diffuse into these capillaries, and then they will be transported from this capillary system by the veins into another capillary system in the anterior pituitary gland. When those factors now reach in this second capillary system, this time they are diffusing out of the capillaries. Here they were diffusing in. So that is how releasing factors from the hypothalamus are transported to the anterior pituitary gland. Now, we look at the posterior pituitary gland. The transportation mechanism is completely different. Of course, there are nerve cells there. Now, instead of these nerve cells producing the releasing factors or hormone into the capillaries, these cells have their cell bodies in the hypothalamus, and then their axons will extend all the way into the posterior pituitary gland. So you can see that green axon. That is a cell body, that is the axon, then it terminates here. So, in short, the posterior pituitary gland does not need blood vessels to transport their hormones. They just need these long axons to reach the posterior pituitary gland. So we call that as the hypothalamic hypophyseal tract, not portal system. So those are the two communication mechanisms found between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. One involves capillaries, the other one involves axons. Now, there are two types of hormones that the posterior pituitary gland will produce. We call it oxytocin and ADH, antidiuretic hormone. So oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone is being synthesized by these cells. So for example, the green ones will synthesize oxytocin, the yellow ones will synthesize oxytocin. Then each one of these axons will transport that oxytocin here. This one will transport ADH there and bypass the capillaries. So in short, the posterior pituitary gland does not actually produce hormones of their own. They simply store what has been produced there. Okay, but anterior pituitary gland, they wait for signals. Substances coming from the hypothalamus through the blood vessels. When they diffuse here now, that's when the cells of the anterior pituitary gland will now secrete. So they actually produce and secrete. But the posterior pituitary gland doesn't produce, it just stores and secrete. Okay. All right, so I think these have been explained using the diagram. Okay. Now, when you're looking at the microscope, like we earlier mentioned, the two parts of the pituitary gland appear differently. This is anterior pituitary gland, this is posterior pituitary gland. This is nervous tissue, that is glandular tissue. Then this is a pars intermedia, separating the anterior from the posterior pituitary gland. Okay, that is a pars tubularis, that is a infundibular stalk. Gland, nerve. So nothing is produced here except they are stored and then released when the body needs them. Okay. Now, when we look at the anterior pituitary gland, this one here, we're going to discover two types of cells. So there are two types of cells. So we have what we call chromophobes and chromophiles. So I'll use a diagram to explain chromophobes and chromophiles. So this is a section of the anterior pituitary gland. So you find that if you're looking at the anterior pituitary gland, there are cells that will appear as if they're not staining well. They are pale in the staining. Look at that cell, almost whitish or grayish. Then the rest are pinkish, bluish, orange in nature, like that. So the ones that don't stain well, the ones that stain grayish and the rest, we call them chromophobe, because it's like they fear the stain. Phobia means fear. So these are chromophobes. Then the chromophiles now, these are cells that love the stain or they will accept the stain. So in terms of function, the chromophobes are cells that are non-functional. So at that stage, they're not producing anything. They will not produce any hormone. Okay? But the chromophiles, the ones that accept a stain, are the ones that produce hormones in the anterior pituitary gland. So there are two types, again, of chromophiles. I hope you have followed me on that one. First of all, there are two types of cells in the anterior pituitary gland. Those that will accept the stain, we call them chromophiles. Those that will reject the stain, we call them chromophobes, like this one. Chromophobe, chromophiles. Now, we're saying among the chromophiles, we are going to see two different types of colors. There are those that accept acidic stain. There are those that accept alkali stain. So the ones that accept alkali stain, we call them acidophiles, like these ones here, orange in nature, or red in nature. Then the ones that accept alkali stain, they'll stain bluish, we'll call them basophiles. So these are not similar to basophils found in blood, no. We're just using the name because of the type of stain they are accepting. Acidophiles, basophiles. So in short, you can say chromophiles are of two types. They are those that we call acidophiles and basophiles. Okay, now majority of cells in the anterior pituitary gland are actually acidophiles, forming about 50%. Okay. So this is a summary which I want you to look at in your own free time. I want you to know the type of acidophiles we have in the anterior pituitary gland. For example, somatotrophs, mammotrophs. So mammo means mammary gland, like breasts. So these deal with prolactin. Somatotroph, soma means body. So they produce growth hormone. Then basophiles, we have corticotrophs. Cortico meaning the cortex of the adrenal gland. So they act on the adrenal gland. Then gonads means testis and ovary. So follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. Then thyrotrophs, thyroid gland. So they produce thyroid-stimulating hormone. Then you can, so just study this table in short. That is a summary of cells found in the anterior pituitary gland. So all those that will appear grayish, they are the chromophobes. Like you can see there, the grayish spaces, those are chromophobes. Okay. All right. So when it comes to the neurohypophysis, now, this is a posterior pituitary gland. I was saying posterior pituitary gland has axons. Cell bodies of those axons are in the hypothalamus, this one and this one. Then they send the axons into the posterior pituitary gland. Now, the hormone will be produced here, then goes with the axon, okay, and remain here. Okay, now, when the body needs, for example, oxytocin or antidiuretic hormone, that's when this axon will release that ADH into this capillary there. And then the capillary will collect that and take into the circulation and reach the kidneys. Okay. Now, within the axons, there are small structures called herring bodies. So this is the axon here, then magnified there. Then this is a capillary that is cut. And those are the red blood cells. These are red blood cells. So within one axon, there are small granules. Those granules will contain antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. So we call them as herring body. These small islands. So this herring body here, for example, can have antidiuretic hormone. This one can have oxytocin. Okay. So that is how the posterior pituitary gland works. So all these herring bodies will remain here, and they're only released like here when the body needs it. In addition to having axons, the posterior pituitary gland has support cells. Cells that form like connective tissue. So we call those cells as pituicytes. Pituicytes. Okay. So they are just there as connective tissue cells. That is a spelling here, pituicytes. They are there just to support and protect the axons here. Okay. So that's all about the posterior pituitary gland and the anterior pituitary glands. So which hormones are produced by the anterior pituitary gland? The table summarizes that. These are the hormones here. Growth hormone, prolactin, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and thyroid-stimulating hormone. Which hormones are produced by the posterior pituitary gland? It is antidiuretic hormone, otherwise known as vasopressin. Then we have oxytocin, which works on the uterine muscles. Vasopressin or ADH works on the distal and proximal convoluted tubules of the nephrons in the kidneys. So for today, we'll end here because I'm rushing somewhere, and that's it. We have run out of time. So thank you for your attention. We'll have some more exhaustive lecture next time. We'll finish up the endocrine system.